Hello there, Little Masters, and welcome to another weekly episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, Bilbo finally learns that invisibility has its drawbacks.
West to Hall, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, the Dory to my Nori, Alan Sisto.
Did you do that on purpose, Sean? Because, way back in our intro to The Hobbit, I was the Nori to your Dory. Did you know that? Did you remember?
Let's go with yes.
Let's go with yes. I like that. It has been a while, after all.
It has been quite a while. I had no idea.
Well, folks, it's somewhat bittersweet tonight as we come to the penultimate chapter of The Hobbit, Chapter 18, The Return Journey. Here we start the goodbyes, and some of them are bigger goodbyes than others.
But there is some truly beautiful stuff in this chapter, some very poignant moments, and a fitting end to, well, I guess almost end to our story.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we get into any of that, let's have our next installment of This Week in Tolkien History.
All right, well, speaking of bittersweet, poignant moments, last week we had that Tolkien quote of the day about how the war made Tolkien aware of the beauty of the world. This week, June 3rd is when this episode is coming out. This actually marks the anniversary of his going to war. This is the week that Tolkien shipped out to France in 1916.
Wow. Christina Scull and Wayne Hammond's Chronology, which is an amazing resource, by the way, gives a brief but heartbreaking chronicle of this week in 1916. June 4th, Tolkien and Edith say farewell. He goes to London by train. June 5th, Tolkien reports to the embarkation staff officer and spends the night. June 6th, Tolkien crosses the English Channel to Calais and travels to camp number 32 at Étaples. Equipment he had bought, including a camp bed, sleeping bag, mattress, and spare boots having failed to arrive, he begs, borrows, or buys replacements. June 7th, Tolkien moves to camp number 25 at Étaples. Tolkien dislikes the hardened professional officers above him, who treat him like a schoolboy, but he will come to respect the ordinary enlisted men. Although as an officer he cannot make friends among them, he appreciates their qualities and will have closer contact with those who serve as his Batman. And we see that experience he had getting to know his Batman in the relationship with Frodo and Samwise.
Boy, we absolutely do.
Yeah.
As always, when we talk about this period of Tolkien's life, I'm drawn to what's just a truly beautiful and moving description of this week in John Garth's Tolkien and the Great War. I'm going to read just a little bit of it, and this is from the chapter Larkspur and Canterbury Bells. When his train from London's Charing Cross Station pulled into Folkestone at 1 o'clock the following Monday, now this would have been Monday, June 5th, the day he reported to that embarkation staff officer in Folkestone, Tolkien found a town transformed from the quiet port he had seen in 1912 on camp with King Edward's horse. Now it was humming with activity, its hotels full of soldiers. He spent Monday night there, and the next day, 6 June, boarded a troop ship that steamed across the channel under escort by a destroyer. He watched the seabirds wheeling over the gray waters, and England recede, the lonely isle of his mythology.
Well, I'm not going to let you keep all the John Garth passages to yourself. From that same chapter, we get this description of that experience, that terrible experience of losing all of his gear when he arrived at the base depot at Étaples. I'm trying desperately not to mispronounce that. Eat apples, as it was known to the insular Tommy, I could have just pronounced it that way.
Yeah, you could have.
Was a veritable prison, notorious for its vindictive regime. Fenced in among the shoreland sands and pines, it consisted of a sprawl of warehouses and the tented camps run by each army division, British, Canadian, South African, Australian, or New Zealand. To compound his bad luck, the kit he had bought at such expense on his friend G.B. Smith's advice had disappeared in transit, forcing him to cobble together a whole new set of equipment, including camp bed and sleeping bag, for nights under canvas in the chill of what turned out to be a most wintry June.
It's just a chilling description, and I truly do not intend the pun there, because I wouldn't dare make light of it. I mean, it is amazing that he made it back, and I'm grateful he did.
Indeed, I'm reminded actually of Simon Tolkien's book No Man's Land, and the reality that so many didn't make it back.
Yeah,
including most of Tolkien's own friends.
Yeah. Well, so that's this week in Tolkien history in 1916. I think this will be a little bit anticlimactic now, but also in this week in 1955, Tolkien wrote one of my favorite letters of his. Letter number 163 to W.H. Auden was written on June 7th, 1955.
Ah, yeah.
And that's the one that contains some of my favorite moments in his letters, from the Welsh words on the coal trucks to the wine cellar of Finnish, from the green great dragon to the childhood spider attack.
That's right, that's all in there.
It's all in there, some great stuff. And I highly recommend you get a copy of Humphrey Carpenter's Letters volume and read it if you haven't already.
Oh, yeah, the letters are truly, truly a must-read. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad we ended on that note. This chapter is going to have plenty of sadness and sorrow already, so
yeah,
let's go ahead and get into it, shall we?
Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to start at the very beginning. I mean, we'll touch on all that stuff, but the first reading that you've got starts a little bit later. So Bilbo wakes up. I love his first thought. Well, he's not a fallen hero, not quite yet.
Not yet one of the fallen heroes. Suppose there's still time for that.
But it looks like we won. I mean, there's good
no
news.
Living goblins around.
Yeah.
Elves moving around.
Mm-hmm.
Dwarves busy removing the wall.
Yeah, I love that. Cool. That's such a symbolic thing right there.
Yeah. So victory after all is his conclusion.
Yeah, but sad.
But gloomy, but a very gloomy business.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems kind of a very Bagginsy observation, you know.
Yeah.
That there's, I mean, it's a very honest observation. I kind of want to read too much into it. But I don't know. Just some of his wording reminds me of the Baggins there. Oh, it's a gloomy business. Sometimes it's kind of an understatement.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like what we saw last time with how, you know, this defeat may be glorious is what I'd heard, but really it seems very uncomfortable, not to say distressing. It's that same sort of, wow, that's really a way to put it, isn't it?
Yeah, right, exactly.
But this phrase that sorrow seemed to be in the air was just kind of foreboding, really, as we'll find out. But you've got the first reading, and I'm going to let you just get to it.
Okay. Suddenly he was aware of a man climbing up and coming towards him. "Hello there," he called with a shaky voice. "Hello there. What news?" "What voice is it that speaks among the stones?" said the man, halting, and peering about him not far from where Bilbo sat. Then Bilbo remembered his ring. "Well, I'm blessed," said he. "This invisibility has its drawbacks after all. Otherwise, I suppose I might have spent a warm and comfortable night in bed." "It's me, Bilbo Baggins, companion of Thorin," he cried, hurriedly taking off the ring. "It is well that I have found you," said the man, striding forward. "You are needed, and we have looked for you long. You would have been numbered among the dead, who are many, if Gandalf the Wizard had not said that your voice was last heard in this place. I have been sent to look here for the last time. Are you much hurt?" "A nasty knock on the head, I think," said Bilbo. "But I have a helm and a hard skull. All the same, I feel sick, and my legs are like straws." "I will carry you down to the camp in the valley," said the man, and picked him lightly up. The man was swift and sure-footed. It was not long before Bilbo was set down before a tent in Dale, and there stood Gandalf, with his arm in a sling. Even the wizard had not escaped without a wound, and there were few unharmed in all the host.
A Pyrrhic victory indeed.
Very.
There's more here than you might think. You know, I think that's one thing we've discovered throughout the whole book. If there's one line that could describe it, there's a lot more here than you think. I think it's telling that Bilbo identifies himself as companion of Thorin.
Yeah.
After being cast down.
Everything that's happened,
Yeah.
And it kind of points to what we said, you know, some time ago. He really did not think of giving the Arkenstone away as a betrayal. No. He still believes that he still sees himself as companion of Thorin.
I think he still has faith in who Thorin is, and you know, if he got to see Thorin's charge out from the mountainside, then you know perhaps that gave him some reason to hope.
Yeah, true.
We get some bad news couched in few words here, that you would have been numbered among the dead, who are many.
Yeah,
there's a lot of loss here. There's a lot of loss.
Yeah,
and the same thing about how few unharmed and all the
few host. Unharmed. I was just going to say, that you come back to that at the end of that passage.
Yeah.
Everyone's been wounded.
Yeah, even Gandalf, who you just would think could hardly be harmed, but even him.
Poor Bilbo with his ring on.
Yeah, that helped. I mean, well, it helped and it hurt. I mean, he could have spent a warm night in bed.
Yeah. Invisibility has its drawbacks. It's not just good for stealing food from elves. Being
unconscious and invisible is probably a bad idea when people are looking for you.
Can you imagine? I mean, that's a horrible way to be unconscious.
That would be. That would be. Not that you know it.
Basically have to wait for somebody to trip over you.
Yeah.
And then wonder what they just tripped over.
Yeah. Like when they felt like they tripped over him in the
oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
In the forest.
Yeah, that's right.
One thing I thought was interesting is doing some of the research as we looked through Rateliff, finding out that in the original manuscripts, in I think the third phase, it wasn't a man that found Bilbo here, but actually an eagle that was perched and looking, and the text actually had at one point.
That was interesting.
The very self-same eagle that had carried him to the Carrack.
Yeah. Boy, there's a coincidence for you.
Yeah, boy. Now Rateliff thinks that Tolkien changed this because he'd already written that Bilbo never saw them again, but he didn't forget them. Mm-hmm. So that may be why he did that. But
yeah, I think that makes sense, and I like this way better. Honestly.
I do too. I think it's probably a little over the top to have the exact same eagle. Oh, well, it's you again.
Yeah. and I think the way the eagles are involved now, we talked about the eucatastrophe last week, and they because of the way they're involved, they kind of swoop in, they deliver the eucatastrophe or the second eucatastrophe, and then that's it. They don't stay around. They don't stay involved.
No, they're out of the story again.
Right, and I think if they did, I think maybe it would have diminished the eucatastrophe somewhat.
Maybe
it would have made them feel much more. It would have raised the question of whether they should be counted as one of the five armies. You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah, certainly.
So, yeah, I like the fact that they swoop in and then they're gone again. It's just it reminds us of that. It's not to be counted on.
That's exactly right. It is by definition something that is unpredictable and unexpected.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, goodness. This next scene is something I don't know how much I had to pay you to get this passage, but at the same time, I'm also quite nervous about it. It's a very, very poignant passage, and I hope I don't, I hope I do it service, but.
It is. I think you got this. I'm ready for it.
All right. When Gandalf saw Bilbo, he was delighted. "Baggins!" he exclaimed. "Well, I never! Alive after all! I am glad. I began to wonder if even your luck would see you through. Terrible business, and it nearly was disastrous. But other news can wait. Come," he said more gravely. "You are called for." And leading the hobbit, he took him within the tent. "Hail, Thorin," he said as he entered. "I have brought him." There indeed lay Thorin Oakenshield, wounded with many wounds, and his rent armor and notched axe were cast upon the floor. He looked up as Bilbo came beside him. "Farewell, good thief," he said. "I go now to the halls of waiting to sit beside my fathers until the world is renewed. Since I leave now all gold and silver, and go where it is of little worth, I wish to part in friendship from you, and I would take back my words and deeds at the gate." Bilbo knelt on one knee, filled with sorrow. "Farewell, King under the Mountain," he said. "This is a bitter adventure, if it must end so, and not a mountain of gold can amend it. Yet I am glad that I have shared in your perils. That has been more than any Baggins deserves." "No," said Thorin. "There is more in you of good than you know, child of the kindly West. Some courage and some wisdom blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. But sad or merry, I must leave it now. Farewell." Then Bilbo turned away, and he went by himself, and sat alone, wrapped in a blanket. And whether you believe it or not, he wept until his eyes were red, and his voice was hoarse. My goodness,
that is a powerful scene.
That is a very powerful scene. Thorin, it's so powerful, having watched the dragon sickness take such hold, to see him come back.
Yeah. And come back so strongly.
Yes.
He's become more than the dwarf he was at the start of this adventure. He's become, he hasn't just gone back to where he was before the dragon sickness. He's become better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
He has,
we saw that with the charge, and his willingness to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's redeemed himself,
He has.
many times over, I think, just with this last sentiment.
Yeah. And he's done what we say Boromir did in terms of he has repented of his action, he's repented of his words and his deeds, and he's shown that repentance in the things that he's done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here it's just words, but even the charge out, really is what I think demonstrated that he was no longer being held by that dragon sickness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his death does remind me a great deal of Boromir's, and it's not just because we talked about this last time about how Thorin is to Boromir the way Dain is to Faramir.
Right.
I think that just as Thorin's last charge reminds me a little bit of Theoden, but you're right, there's some Boromir there too. But his death is just so much Boromir. It's this recognition of his mistake, this repentance.
Yes.
And ultimate redemption, I think.
Yeah.
Before he
absolutely.
dies.
I totally agree. And it's a reminder of the importance of repentance and redemption in Tolkien's works. We see it a lot, really. I think we've said before, every character gets multiple opportunities to repent. What they do with those opportunities is up to them, but thankfully Thorin made the most of his. And
I love the wisdom in, his forgiveness of Bilbo.
Yeah.
More than just forgiveness.
Yeah. More like asking him to forgive Thorin.
Yeah, kind of.
He's like, forgive me.
But even just, I love this phrase, good thief. Farewell, good thief, he said.
Thief, yes.
We talked about the fact that Bilbo is frequently called burglar, but he's only ever called thief a few times by Gollum, by Smaug, and by Thorin, all of whom are people he actually does steal from.
Right.
Remember, and I think I mentioned this a couple of episodes ago, Thorin called the men of Lake Town thieves in chapter 15.
Yes, he did.
Though they were not. He actually called them that in the last episode, too, I believe.
Right.
They were not thieves. All they were doing was asking for some help, for some gold that they helped win.
Yeah.
And then when he's actually stolen from, in the chapter we read last week, he lost his mind. Now he's come full circle, and he recognizes that Bilbo is a thief, but he's a good thief.
He's a good thief.
He did it for the right reasons, and he forgives him. It's another kind of another spin on the honest burglar concept.
Yeah.
But specifically, he's forgiving him for the theft and asking, as you said, asking him for forgiveness for the way he treated him.
Yeah. He's finally realized that Bilbo is chaotic good, and that was this problem all along. He didn't realize his alignment. You can be a good thief. No. Yeah.
It's kind of more neutral good, don't you think?
Yeah. That's true. You just can't be lawful good and be a thief. That's true.
Right.
The repentance is just something I just can't get over. It's such a beautiful moment. He wishes to part in friendship. He repents of his words and his deeds, and then has the most kind things to say. He tells Bilbo, "You've got more in you than you know.
Yeah.
Not only are you courageous, but you're wise, and those characteristics are blended perfectly. And man, if we just learn from you and from the hobbits in general that we value food and cheer and song above gold, what a better place our world would be." And that is such a central statement.
That's a dwarf saying that.
Yeah.
Think about that. Let that sink in for a moment.
Yeah.
A dwarf has learned that there are things in the world more important than hoarded gold.
Yeah. A dwarf who spent the entirety of this book in the last several years of his life,
thinking
trying
about
to figure out
that
how he's going to get that hoarded gold back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spent most of his life thinking about that gold, and the last few chapters obsessed with that gold, bewitched by that
literally.
gold.
It was,
And now he has realized the wisdom of just simple hobbit sense.
Yeah.
Is sort of a phrase we might get from Lord of the Rings,
Yeah. And I think that's really part of Tolkien kind of coming out there, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. We talked a few episodes ago about, Tolkien's famous quote about, he's a hobbit and all the things he has in common.
Yeah, that's right. I love that.
And, I think we get that, just the celebration of simple pleasures. You go back to the first chapter of The Hobbit, and you learn what exactly is a hobbit, and you learn about or go, look forward ahead, since we're going to go into Lord of the Rings soon. You look to the prologue
the
concerning
prologue,
hobbits, and the things they value, and how much the rest of the world, the rest of Middle Earth, well, the rest of the world, the rest of the real world, the primary world, could learn from some of that Hobbit wisdom. It's a beautiful, beautiful statement, and this is absolutely one of my favorite sentences, paragraphs.
Oh yeah,
paragraphs. There's a few sentences there. It's one of my favorite paragraphs in the entire book, in the entire Legendarium.
And I had to pay you a great deal in order to take it. I know.
You did.
I think I promised you at least 2 pieces of poetry in the next chapter, and
I think so. Yeah.
And then I just reminded you that you took everything that remotely was related to Eärendil.
But then one of them was Tra-la-la-lally in the next chapter, and I knew you weren't going to take that one anyway, so that one barely counted. But
I probably still owe you then. I'm probably still in your debt.
At the risk of not diving deeply into every single word in this paragraph, I kind of want to talk even about Child of the Kindly West.
Oh, yes.
This is, of course, just within the context of The Hobbit, the West is the civilized part of the map. And so this is a way, even if you look at this sort of as a solo phase comment, he's calling Bilbo a gentle soul from civilized places.
Right.
But if you think about this in the broader context of the Legendarium, Child of the Kindly West, he's associating him with goodness and holiness and everything that is good and pure in Middle Earth.
I agree.
And that's a really powerful statement.
It is a very powerful statement. That's a good catch. One of the things that's interesting about this very, very powerful moment is that it almost wasn't. Rateliff points out that the death of Thorin was a late development. He says that it wasn't even present at all in the second phase, and that there were no hints of it in any of the plot notes. That's stunning to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and according to Rateliff, he also calls this the first instance of the older Legendarium being altered to match Bilbo's story. Now, we've talked before about the way dwarves were depicted in, like the Book of Lost Tales and some of those early works. Downright evil in some depictions. If you look at something like the Annals of Beleriand, dwarves are said to have no spirit indwelling, as have the children of the Creator, which would be children of Ilúvatar, elves and men.
Right. Yeah.
And they go back into the stone of the mountains of which they were made.
Oh, my.
Tolkien would later amend that in the Quenta Silmarillion to say that this is what the Noldor believed, but that others say that Aulë cares for them, and that Ilúvatar will accept from them the work of his desire, so that the dwarves shall not perish. And then we saw how that's echoed in Chapter 2, and what they say about the fate of the dwarves after death.
Right.
I think the deathbed words of Thorin, I think, changed the entire fate of dwarves after death in Tolkien's Legendarium.
Oh, wow. Quite an accomplishment.
I think he just felt like this scene needed something more than, it's just going to die and turn to stone.
Yeah, he's going to turn back into rock.
Thorin needs a spirit that is going to live on after death in order for this scene to be really powerful.
To have that kind of significance. Yeah, absolutely.
And so he changed the entire fate of dwarves so that this moment would work. That's brilliant.
That's beautiful. That's just awesome. I love that. I think that's the way that a story can take you, as a writer like Tolkien, who was open to anything that would, fit within his Legendarium, to fit within the mythology that was consistent. He would allow these moments to kind of change and shift things. And that's why it's always hard to say, what's the one answer to questions. When people ask a question about things, sometimes you just don't know what the answer is that he finally landed on. But at least here we do, One other thing is we've talked a lot about the balance of the Took and Baggins sides. And, Thorin's last words really highlight this, that whole idea of the courage and wisdom blended in measure. Again, because I could say it, but Olson says it better, I'm going to quote him. This is a little bit of a lengthy quote, but it's worth it. This new mingling of characteristics is the other thing that Thorin praises, the blending of courage with wisdom in his character. Since we've been following the interplay between Bilbo's Took and Baggins elements from the beginning, the existence of contrasting factors in Bilbo's character is no surprise. What Thorin perceives in Bilbo, here at the end of his quest, is the fact that they are now blended in measure. Courage and wisdom are appropriate descriptors of his Took and Baggins sides, respectively, but only when they are properly combined. In isolation, neither side steers him in the right direction. By itself, his tookishness comes out as rashness and arrogance. Left to itself, his Baggins side led him into laziness and timidity. But blended together in measure, his different but complementary perspectives lend him both courage and wisdom. At the end of his journey, we see that neither the Took nor the Baggins side has won. They have been reconciled.
Boy, you're not kidding about saying it better than you've ever said it.
That was a brilliant bit from him. I mean, it was really, really.
And we've
well
talked
crafted.
about balance a few times. We've had questions about balance, and we spent quite a bit of time over the last few chapters talking about how it isn't the triumph of Took over Baggins.
No.
It really is.
It is the
balance. And
I love this, the reconciliation of the two. Yeah.
That's cool. That's a bigger word
Great
than
phrase.
balance.
It is, isn't it?
It's a reconciliation. It implies that there is conflict and that those two sides should not exist in harmony.
Yeah.
But they now do.
They are. They're blended in measure now. And that's the important part. Well, I guess that's it for the chapter because that's really the most important stuff. No.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the book. No.
Bilbo, of course, is just brokenhearted. And we're not going to read all of it, but there is that little line about how it was long before he had the heart to make a joke again. That says a lot about the sorrow that he's in.
Yeah, that's a good catch.
Yeah.
I picked up on his "You are a fool, Bilbo Baggins," his sort of self-reproach. And you made a great mess of that business with the stone. You know, after everything that's happened and after as poorly as he was treated by Thorin, he still takes personal accountability for things not turning out all right. You know, that's very profound to me.
Yeah.
The humility inherent in that statement that he's thinking of his own mistake in all this. It would be so easy for him to just say, oh, well, Thorin has admitted that he was wrong and he's repented for that. And so I'm going to rest easy now knowing that it was all Thorin. No, he still believes that he
had a part to play.
Feels remorse for something that he did.
Though, I mean,
he's
he
being
also
a little too hard on himself, frankly. But
a little bit, and I think he recognizes at the very end when he says, "I suppose it can hardly be blamed."
Be blamed for that. That's true.
But he realizes that, you made a mess of it. You made a hash of this, and it's just, But I think the last line just says, "Look, this was going to happen one way or the other."
Yeah, I think
there was going to be.
He realizes that wisdom creeps in, and he realizes that there is truly nothing he could do, and maybe it's just the remorse of knowing your friend has died. Maybe this is just sort of a stage of grief for him. He's thinking about the things that he did wrong.
That's a good point. I like that. Well, what happened during the battle? The narrator tells us this. This is, again, we talked about this, I think, in the movie episodes about how, as Dr. Shippey might say, that when he quoted Tolkien as saying that the canons of narrative art cannot be wholly different. Well, how different can they be?
How different can they be?
And he talks about how one of the canons of narrative art, of written art, is to show and not tell. And yet that's exactly what Tolkien does. And this is an example of that. Right. Here it is, after the fact, we're being told of it by the narrator.
Classic action scene through flashback that we see quite a few times in Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and take that for us?
All right. The eagles had long had suspicion of the goblins' mustering. From their watchfulness, the movements in the mountains could not be altogether hid. So they too had gathered in great numbers under the great eagle of the misty mountains, and at length, smelling battle from afar, they had come speeding down the gale in the nick of time. They it was who dislodged the goblins from the mountain slopes, casting them over precipices, or driving them down, shrieking and bewildered among their foes. It was not long before they had freed the lonely mountain, and elves and men on either side of the valley could come at last to the help of the battle below. But even with the eagles they were still outnumbered. In that last hour Beorn himself had appeared. No one knew how or from where. He came alone and in bear's shape, and he seemed to have grown almost to giant size in his wrath. The roar of his voice was like drums and guns, and he tossed wolves and goblins from his path like straws and feathers. He fell upon their rear and broke like a clap of thunder through the ring. The dwarves were making a stand, still about their lords, upon a low rounded hill. Then Beorn stooped and lifted Thorin, who had fallen, pierced with spears, and bore him out of the fray. Swiftly he returned, and his wrath was redoubled, so that nothing could withstand him, and no weapon seemed to bite upon him. He scattered the bodyguard, and pulled down Bolg himself, and crushed him. Then dismay fell on the goblins, and they fled in all directions.
Man. Beorn.
Yeah,
Beorn's
Beorn.
the hero, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember from the Father Christmas letters, North Polar Bear?
Yes. That kind of reminded me of that. Especially the straws and feathers. He's just throwing them everywhere. And
I
totally
remember
reminded
that-
me of NPB.
That awesome and kind of adorable picture of North Polar Bear
just throwing
grabbing
the-
goblins and flinging them and kicking them, and I think that letter actually was, I think it was from like maybe 1940, 1941 or something. I think it was actually after The Hobbit, so that was a case of The Hobbit influencing the letter as opposed to the opposite. But
that is brilliant.
I can't help thinking of it. Thank you, Beorn, for coming.
Very much.
And thank you, the Eagles, for watching and gathering
and showing up, and then starting to fling these goblins off the mountain slope.
Yeah.
The metaphors here, that Beorn's voice was like drums and guns, and then he
Cool
tossed
little
those
anachronism
goblins
from the narrator.
Yeah, drums and guns. But then I'm just thinking of just how powerful these metaphors are. The roar is like drums and guns. The tossing is like straws and feathers. And then he breaks like a clap of thunder through the ring. I just love how he uses all metaphors to describe what Beorn does.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. One of them is kind of anachronistic.
No, but that's okay because, I mean, the
it's the
narrator
narrator's
does
voice.
insert himself into the story.
Right,
Remember
absolutely. We get that all the time.
Whistle like a freight train, wasn't
Right.
it?
This isn't like Gandalf telling us this, because that would be a truly anachronistic moment.
Right,
but this is the
exactly.
narrator, and that's okay.
And you're right. It is such a powerful series of metaphors. We get all sorts of sensory, we get the sound. We get sort of a tactile metaphor
straws
with
and
the
feathers, because you can
feathers.
immediately feel those in your hand, and you're throwing them around like they're nothing.
Yeah.
And then the
then the clap of
auditory, the
thunder.
clap of thunder. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then he himself, he slays Bolg.
Oh, so
What a
cool.
moment. That is
So cool. Pulled him
awesome.
down and crushed him.
You're done. And then, of course,
You've been bared.
You've been bared.
And then dismay fell on the goblins, and they fled in all directions.
Morale,
we see
morale
this.
boost, or morale, cut.
Morale killer, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you see
The
this a
beating
lot in
shall
Tolkien.
continue until morale improves.
You see that a lot in Tolkien's works, the idea that evil is weak without a leader. As soon as Bolg is taken down, the goblins just like,
Well, if
Okay,
they
we're
can take down Bolg, we're out of here. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly.
Absolutely.
Such a cool moment.
It really is. So now victory is certain, but, Bilbo's here and is like, well, where is everybody? And kind of the point is, look, they're all still chasing after them all. I mean, the eagles, most of them are actually have gone back home to their eyries, but some are still hunting, and the other men, elves, and dwarves are out chasing down the bad guys.
Yep.
They do talk about Dane having crowned the eagle with gold and swearing eternal friendship. And that's a kind of a big moment.
That's super
there.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Dan continues to demonstrate what a good leader should
He
do.
continues to impress,
after
and he'll do
seeing
that
some-
again
yes,
here shortly.
Yes, he does. Time and time again.
Absolutely.
And that kind of makes me think of there's a lot of restorative language in this chapter, and I think the
there
next
really
one
is.
too. But we get this idea of the mountains had peace for many a year.
Yeah.
And you start to see these alliances, these friendships forming between the dwarves and the eagles. We'll see it again. I won't spoil it, but we'll talk about it in a moment. Between the dwarves and the other races, and you just see how this region has now just been completely restored, and it's a dawning of a new age for this region.
It is. And before they can get to that new age, they have to bury Thorin. And I'm going to go ahead and pick up there. They buried Thorin deep beneath the mountain, and Bard laid the Arkenstone upon his breast. There let it lie till the mountain falls, he said. May it bring good fortune to all his folk that dwell hereafter. Upon his tomb the elven king then laid Orcrist, the elvish sword that had been taken from Thorin in captivity. It is said in songs that it gleamed ever in the dark if foes approached, and the fortress of the dwarves could not be taken by surprise. There now Dain son of Nain took up his abode, and he became king under the mountain, and in time many other dwarves gathered to his throne in the ancient halls. Of the 12 companions of Thorin, 10 remained, Fili and Kili had fallen defending him with shield and body, for he was their mother's elder brother. The others remained with Dain, for Dain dealt his treasure well. Wow. Feely and Keely. Man.
Feely and Keely dying, defending Thorin.
Yeah, and again, they're just as a reminder, their death was not in any of the manuscripts, didn't show up until the typescript.
Yeah.
That's a sorrowful moment there, but they died doing what they were supposed to do, defending their king.
Yeah. I'm reminded just a little bit of Éowyn, who did not die, but who was ready to die, defending Theoden on the battlefield.
For her.
And only partly because we've been talking about Thorin and Theoden. I've been comparing those two for the last couple of weeks now.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you get a little bit of that final stand.
But you know what? Before we move on, the last line in that reading is something that really is important. The others remained with Dain, for Dain dealt his treasure well. That gives us that really is big. That gives us a chance to kind of revisit that sidebar we did on Dain last week. In that we talked, of course, about him being Thorin as he was meant to be. And now we've seen some more examples of that. Swearing friendship with the eagles and dealing his treasure well. So it's time to talk about some of the other things that Rateliff points out about Dain, even though he's a so-called minor character that's really always in the background. We just saw he's fair in dealing his treasure. Well, that's the chief requirement of an Anglo-Saxon king, isn't it? I mean... Right. You know,
that's what gold
makes
is
him
for.
A king.
You know,
right.
Yeah, it's to reward fealty, not to sit on it like
not
a dragon.
to hoard. Yeah. And more than that, in a moment, we're going to see that he goes beyond just keeping his word in giving Bard the necklace of Girion. Remember last week when Thorin specifically excluded the gems from the 1/14 of the hoard that he was going to pay, and I told you, remember that? Well, here shortly we're going to find out that he gives the necklace of Girion to Bard, even though Thorin had excluded gems from the price that he was going to pay.
That's right, yeah.
So that's a really big example of Dain being this kind of idealized king.
Yeah. Yeah, as you said, he continues to impress. At every turn. And, you know, we talked couple of episodes ago about the information from the Lord of the Rings appendices about how he fought at Moria, killing Azog even when he was still a whippersnapper.
Just a stripling, right?
Yeah, but he also kept Thrain from trying to reclaim Moria at the time.
That's right.
He knew that Durrensbane, the Balrog, still remained there.
Yep.
And so, you know, that's just one indication of his wisdom. While he comes to Thorin's aid here, coming back to this scene,
right, to our story, yeah.
He knows to quickly ally with men and with elves when the goblins arrive.
Right.
And he doesn't go back to fighting them once that battle's over. He doesn't say, the goblins are done, now I'm going to take out these guys. He negotiates.
Now that the elves have been weakened, I'm going to now's my chance.
Right. Exactly. And he could have done that if he had less integrity than he does or less wisdom than he does. But instead he negotiates a peace.
That's right.
Even looking ahead to the Council of Elrond, we learn that he was wise enough to see through the lies of Sauron's messengers.
Right.
And even in death, he remains a noble and wise figure. It says he fought on, standing over the body of King Brand before the gate of Erebor until darkness fell.
That's right.
So from the beginning to the end of his story in the appendices, and including this moment here, he's noble, he's wise, he's everything that a dwarven ruler should be.
Yeah, and he seems to always make the right decisions, doesn't he?
He does, and I think it's very fitting that he becomes the fulfillment of the prophecies.
Yeah, and that's the thing. He really does. He fulfills all those prophecies that Thorin thought might be about him, that when the king returns. But some of it was. I still think that him coming out of the mountain shining like gold was certainly
that's a good catch.
part of that prophecy.
I think that was definitely part of the prophecy.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get to the the distribution of wealth, shall we say. I'm going to have you read the next little passage here.
Okay. There was, of course, no longer any question of dividing the hoard in such shares as had been planned, to Balin and Dwalin, and Dori and Nori and Ori, and Owen and Glóin, and Bifur and Bofur and Bombur, or to Bilbo. Yet a 14th share of all the silver and gold, wrought and unwrought, was given up to Bard. For Dain said, "We will honor the agreement of the dead, and he has now the Arkenstone in his keeping." Even a 14th share was wealth exceedingly great, greater than that of many mortal kings. From that treasure Bard sent much gold to the master of Lake Town, and he rewarded his followers and friends freely. To the Elven king he gave the emeralds of Girion, such jewels as he most loved, which Dain had restored to him.
There you go. Dain had restored to him. And I love that, though, because then
And
you see how generous
Bard, you see
Bard
even
is.
Bard doing, playing the proper role of an Anglo-Saxon king.
Absolutely.
Dealing out gold to his followers and
to
friends.
the Lake Town, to the
And his
master of Lake
allies.
Town, and to the Elven king. Yeah. Very, very well done. Well done, sir. Clap, clap, golf clap for Bard.
Yay, Bard.
Yay, Bard.
And there was much rejoicing.
And there was much rejoicing. It's exactly what I was thinking. Yay. So we revisit the fact that, he goes beyond the scope of Thorin's original agreement, includes the emeralds of Girion to the Elven king.
Yep. So as you said, Dain
to
didn't.
Bard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good
So as
stuff.
you said, Dain didn't limit his 14th share to gold and silver.
Right. And again, he's honoring the words, honoring the agreement of the previous king.
Yep.
Though he had a very short reign. So
That's true. But again, yeah, just honoring the agreement, I think, is bigger than it might seem.
there's really a lot. Yeah, it's huge. It's a big thing.
Even though Thorin was not king for very long, and one could probably argue against his legitimacy if one really wanted to.
Sure, it wouldn't be hard.
Not that it wasn't his birthright, but just from the perspective of his behavior as king.
Yeah.
One could argue against his actions, but no, Dain follows the rules. He follows the standards, the sort of the moral and social standards of his culture.
And that's a pretty big chunk of change that he gives him. I mean, like it says, that 14th share, now you think, well, 1/14, that's really not very much. Okay. Yeah, it's probably what, I haven't done the math, 7% maybe? 770? Yeah, just about 7 point something.
I guess so.
7% would be, 7 times 14 would be 98. So,
98. So that's
so it'd be
close
like
enough.
7 point something. So it's not much, but boy,
Unless
it still
it's
turns
of a
out.
very large denominator, which it is.
Exactly. That's the thing. It's still greater than that of many mortal kings.
Greater than the wealth of many mortal kings.
That's a lot of money, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 14th share of a lot is still a lot.
Right. It's not like a 14th share of zero.
No, carry the zero.
Carry the zero.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up right after you left off because, and then I think you even pick up after that.
Do I?
This is one of those, it's such a short chapter that it was hard to pick. I mean, this is really a short chapter. So we kind of ended up reading a little more than we usually do in terms of, percentage of the text. But I pick up right there and then you'll pick up for the goodbyes. To Bilbo, he said, "This treasure is as much yours as it is mine, though old agreements cannot stand, since so many have a claim in its winning and defense. Yet even though you were willing to lay aside all your claim, I should wish that the words of Thorin, of which he repented, should not prove true, that we should give you little. I would reward you most richly of all." "Very kind of you," said Bilbo, "but really it is a relief to me. How on earth should I have got all that treasure home without war and murder all along the way, I don't know. And I don't know what I should have done with it when I got home. I'm sure it is better in your hands." In the end, he would only take 2 small chests, one filled with silver and the other with gold, such as one strong pony could carry. "That will be quite as much as I can manage," said he. Now, I broke that there rather than continuing to the goodbye, not only because I wanted to give you the emotional goodbye since I took Thorin's death.
Which I thank you for.
Yeah, I felt like, hey, I can at least give you that, because those are great lines too, that we're going to get to in a minute. But because this really gives us a chance to kind of do one of our famous digressions. We had one of our listeners, Jonathan L., sent us an email earlier, probably about a month ago, talking about the economic impact of this. How much wealth is here in these chests. So let's break this down.
You did some math on this. I'm glad.
We did some math.
You did. Yeah.
He did some math, and then I changed the math, and here's what we've got. His suggestion, based on, I guess, some Google research that I was able to say.
Jonathan's suggestion, right? This was
Yeah.
Jonathan's. Okay.
This is Jonathan's point, was that a pony can probably carry about 60 to 80 pounds each. He's assuming equal shares, right?
Sure.
One silver, one gold.
Two equal-sized chests, and
right.
that it's the same weight of each. Sure. Okay.
So each chest probably weighs 60 to 80 pounds. Now, the question is, how many coins is that? Now, this is where I differ from his math. I'm going to go with something Tolkien would have been more familiar with. In the old British currency system, it would have been there are 240 pennies in a pound. And I mean, literally in a pound sterling, there were 200.
Which was a pound of silver, right?
Right, which was a pound of silver. There were 240 pennies, or
pence.
What were they called? They weren't called pennies. Pence, that's right. I knew it was just short.
Singular penny, plural pence, yeah.
That's right, right. So if there are 240 pennies in a pound, and there are 60 to 80 pounds each, then we're looking at 14,000 to 19,000 coins, right?
Okay.
So somewhere between 14 and 19,000 coins of silver and 14,000 to 19,000 coins of gold.
That's a lot of coins.
That's a lot of coins. That's a lot of coins. But
so how much are these coins worth, though?
That's the question. Now, this is where I have to kind of differ from our listener Jonathan's suggestion. He tried to draw the analogy, and he was not wrong, to the idea that the 4 silver pennies Butterbur paid for Bill in Fellowship of the Ring. He suggests that sets a value of about $1,000 for 4 silver pennies, because the utility of a horse is about equivalent to the utility of a broken down old used truck today. Okay.
That's a fair analogy.
That's a fair analogy.
Sure,
I get that. That's a really useful metaphor.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say you can get a horse for pretty cheap if it's an old broken down horse. We did some research, didn't we, right before the show?
Yeah.
You know, how can I buy a pony? You know, and the truth is, they're just.
Don't tell my daughter I was pricing ponies on the internet.
Oh goodness! If she finds that in your Google history, she is going to go ballistic.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Even if you don't have the money for a pony, all you got to do is find a boy horse, find a girl horse, throw on a little Barry White, you know.
Couple of...
And the next thing you know,
that's true.
You got yourself a pony.
You want a horse, man? I can get you a horse.
I can get you.
I can make you give me 2 horses.
You want a horse? I can get you a horse.
I can get you a horse made.
Yeah. So let's just go with, and I also want to be really conservative with the value here. So let's go with 1/10 of that value that Jonathan had suggested, that 4 silver pennies would instead be worth $100. That would make each coin worth $25, which is still a pretty significant sum.
And that's probably about fair, because I did find some pretty unimpressive ponies online for $100, $150. So,
unimpressive ponies for $100, $150. We have a couple of equine experts that I'm sure will pipe in, and I wish that we'd reached out prior to recording this episode.
Yeah.
But the numbers that we're coming up with then at about $100 for 4 silver pennies, that means that the silver coins are worth between $360,000 to $480,000. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money, but just you wait, because gold has historically been worth, well, in recent times, it's been worth as much as 50 times as much as silver, but that's not really historically consistent. 10 to 15 times is certainly the right range that we're looking at. So 15 times, even at 15 to 1, that gold, if the silver value is correct, then the gold value would be worth anywhere from $5.4 to $7.2 million. So we're looking at a net sum of like 5.7 to 7.5. Wow. And then there's the pots he picks up on his way home.
And that's a conservative estimate.
Yeah.
That's a conservative estimate saying 4 silver pennies is worth $100.
Yeah. My goodness.
Interesting.
That's a lot of money. I just thought that was a fun little aside.
That is a lot of money, and I'm glad you did the work on that.
Well, Jonathan did a lot
with Jonathan.
of the work.
I think you said Jonathan kind of came up with the
He came up with the idea. Yeah, I kind of changed the values around, both in terms of how many pennies to a pound. I think he came up with a much lower number, probably based on a Dungeons and Dragons reference, I think. But that would make for very heavy pennies, I will say that.
Right.
And instead, we would use something that Tolkien would have been familiar with the pound sterling.
The old pounds, shillings, pence.
Shillings, pence, pounds. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. I'm glad you did that.
It's an interesting idea. And that doesn't even count the mithril coat, which, as we know, is worth more than the entire Shire.
More than the entire Shire, which, man, that's that's
a
money,
lot of
man.
Money.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money. So yeah, he's probably right that having more than that, really, what good would that have done him?
Yeah,
would have gotten him killed on the way home.
Yeah, that's true. And he's got more than enough money to spend, considering that he was already a well-to-do hobbit.
Exactly.
This is just
and as we'll see, it's probably just as well he doesn't come back with that much gold. He probably wouldn't have survived the auction.
That's very true. Yeah. So.
Oh, you're already legally dead. I think I'm going to kill you now.
Yeah. And all the money, and since he spent so much of that money to buy his stuff back anyway.
Well, yeah, some of it at least. That's true.
Yeah. So,
oh, goodness.
That's a lot more fun than the thing I've got here, which is about two chests.
I don't know. I think it's pretty cool.
It's cool. And obviously, I'm always into the mythological references. And this one is one actually that Rateliff picked up on for me. So credit to Rateliff.
Of course.
But there are some similarities between Bilbo's treasure and that of Sigurd, the Dragon Slayer from the Volsunga saga.
Right.
Yeah. In that story, Sigurd fills two chests and loads his horse, Grani, with them. And so there you got the two chests and the horse carrying them.
Right.
And this was such a trope in Norse mythology that the phrase Grani's burden actually became a kenning for gold.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Remember kennings, those compound metaphors.
Right.
They would refer to gold as Grani's burden, and people knew that story so well.
Well, the other interesting bit about that is that the treasures that Sigurd took from Fafnir's hoard, they included a famous sword, a valuable mailcoat, and the Helm of Awe, which supposedly made its wearer invisible. Mm-hmm. So what were the other treasures Bilbo took home, besides two chests loaded onto his horse? Sting, a mithril coat,
sword,
and the one ring.
A mailcoat, and an invisibility object.
Invisibility tool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Pretty cool
that
stuff.
That is awesome.
That really was. Oh, man. Well, it's not time for us to say farewell yet, but it is time for Bilbo to say farewell. Sean, would you take this very emotional moment here?
I will, and I will do my best with it. At last the time came for him to say goodbye to his friends. "Farewell, Balin," he said, "and farewell, Dwalin, and farewell, Dori, Nori, Ori, Owen, Glóin, Bifur, Bofur, and Bombur. May your beards never grow thin." And turning towards the mountain, he added, "Farewell, Thorin Oakenshield, and Fili and Kili. May your memory never fade." Then the dwarves bowed low before their gate, but words stuck in their throats. "Goodbye and good luck wherever you fare," said Balin at last. "If ever you visit us again, when our halls are made fair once more, then the feast shall indeed be splendid." "If ever you are passing my way," said Bilbo, "don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but any of you are welcome at any time."
Oh.
Then he turned away.
What a moment. That takes you right back to chapter 1, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
Don't wait to knock.
Don't wait to knock. He's going to go back to be, you can sense that he's happy to be returning to his home and tea time at 4.
Oh, yes.
And going back
civilization
to
again would be nice.
Some normalcy and some civilization. And he is going to be the same old Baggins he was before, but more so. But more, not more so. But there's going to be more there. Yeah. And now he's going to be the kind of guy who has dwarves over any time. Dwarves are welcome anytime. And that's so cool.
He will. And he will. Interestingly, I did a quick comparison looking. The way that the names showed up made me think of something. So I looked back to chapter 1. And except for Balin and Dwalin being switched, this is exactly the order in which he met them in chapter 1.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yep.
I mean, maybe that's just the list and the way the list worked in Tolkien's mind. I don't know. But I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's cool.
I love the way...
It's funny that they're always in that order.
It is, yeah. I love, though, the thought, the somberness, may your memory never fade. To Thorin and Fili and Kili. It's a reminder that
beautiful.
when we're facing that kind of thing and we're grieving the loss of a friend, the only thing we can do is to hold on to the memories.
Keep the memories. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he will. And they are both, on both sides. They're gonna hold the memory of the adventure. They're gonna hold the memory of the fallen. And I don't know. There's there's this great bond now that's been forged between the hill in the Shire and the mountain. And that's
the hill and the mountain. That's a great point. I love that. It really is. And, I also love how really what Balin and Bilbo are saying are identical. They're just Balin saying it in the way of dwarves with, a little bit of that more formal language and Bilbo's just very hobbity.
Very, very straightforward, very down to earth.
Tease it for.
Tease it for. You're welcome anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's true. And Balin's is, very kind of formal, goodbye and good luck wherever you fare. It's very fantastical, very high fantasy.
Yeah. The feast shall indeed be splendid. Tease it for. I love it.
Well, the feast shall indeed be splendid because Bilbo will be the one cooking it.
Well, right, exactly. We know that. The contents of his larder are well known by Gandalf.
Yeah. Come over anytime. Come back to the mountain and cook for us. And don't forget to bring the cold chicken and pickles.
Oh, man. And the buttered scones with tea.
Yeah.
On Wednesdays, we'll go shopping.
I have buttered scones for tea. I'm a burglar and I'm okay.
That's right. Man, then we could go all day. May your beards never grow thin, because there is no dwarven Rogaine. I just thought we should point that out.
And we know it's a horrible. What's the word? Dishonor for a dwarf to lose their beard.
Horribly, yes. No, that would be a very bad thing. I wonder if it's a bad thing for the female dwarves to lose their beard. Maybe they're actually very grateful when it grows thin. I don't know.
I wonder.
I don't know.
Maybe not.
The chapter kind of ends up, you'd think that's the end of the story. Maybe not. But now is the other half. Now is the beginning of the actual return home.
Yeah. This is kind of the fade to black that you get at the end of Peter Jackson's Return of the King. Before
the first of the fade to blacks, right?
The first of the fade, exactly. The first one before, you get another 30, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Which I'm not complaining about. I thought that was needed.
Too many endings.
But yeah. I had people tell me that, like,
oh yeah,
why were there so many endings? Have you read the book?
Yeah.
Obviously you haven't, because you wouldn't ask me why.
Because there were actually fewer endings in the movie than there were in the book.
Right.
Because we knocked out the entire scouring of the Shire.
There was a whole nother climax in there.
And we were grateful. That's right.
Yes.
So now we have the return journey. Gandalf and Bilbo are traveling, riding behind the Elven King. Beorn, I love this, walks beside them in man shape, awesome. Fortunately. They get to the forest.
A little more predictable that way, I guess.
Well, yeah. And they can probably have a better conversation with him.
That's probably true, too. Like talking to Chewbacca.
They're invited to stay by the Elven King in the Wood Elves Hall, but they decline. And that's because they need to keep going, and they've got a long journey. They're going to go all the way around the north side of the forest, which we know is like 200 miles out of their way.
Right.
But, that's a good decision because it's the way Beorn's going. So when in doubt, go with the Bear Man.
Well, and it is the safer way now, too.
Oh, yeah. Why go through the trees?
This whole region has now been made safer thanks to the Battle of Five Armies. But
the spiders are still there, so don't go through the woods.
Right, exactly. Don't go past the enchanted stream.
Have to cross that again. And now but at least now the boat's on the right side.
That is true. Maybe the Elven King could give them another boat, but no. Why have it? Just go ahead and go around.
Exactly. Seriously.
Hang out with the Bear Man longer.
The Bear Man. He's going to give you the best protection that you can find, really.
He is.
If this is the right to bear arms, really. Or I should say, this is the right to armed bears.
I was going to say, it's a good thing he doesn't have a sword, because then that would be the right to armed bears.
The armed bears, yeah. All right,
wow.
On that terrible, terrible pun, I'm going to pick up on the...
bother.
Is that your Beorn impression?
Yes, that's my Beorn.
I can just see this 7-foot tall grizzly bear saying that in just
with
this
a red
quiet
T-shirt on.
with a little red T-shirt and no pants. Still freaks me out, just saying.
His face in a honey pot. Oh.
Yeah, exactly. The bees.
Stuff and fluff.
Rumbly in my tumbly. Oh, goodness. All right, so I'm going to pick up where they're saying goodbye.
All right.
Farewell, O Elven King, said Gandalf. Merry be the greenwood while the world is yet young, and merry be all your folk. Farewell, O Gandalf, said the king. May you ever appear where you are most needed and least expected. The oftener you appear in my halls, the better shall I be pleased. I beg of you, said Bilbo, stammering and standing on one foot, to accept this gift. And he brought out a necklace of silver and pearls the Daein had given him at their parting. In what way have I earned such a gift, O Hobbit? Said the king. Well, I thought, don't you know, said Bilbo, rather confused, that some little return should be made for your hospitality. I mean, even a burglar has his feelings. I have drunk much of your wine and eaten much of your bread. I will take your gift, O Bilbo the Magnificent, said the king gravely, and I name you elf friend and blessed. May your shadow never grow less, or stealing would be too easy. Farewell. I love that.
I do so love that moment.
It really does kind of raise the opinion of the Elven King in my mind.
Yeah. He, like everybody, he kind of has some bad moments.
Oh, yeah. Sure,
especially
yeah,
after Smaug is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Some very bad moments. But yeah, he remains good people. And yeah, this is a really cool moment.
You know what?
Bilbo,
did you notice?
The honest burglar.
Yeah. Did you notice, though, what the king calls Bilbo? Oh, Bilbo the Magnificent. Do you remember when we talked about that word earlier?
Smaug the
When
Magnificent?
first Bilbo was calling Smaug, Smaug the Magnificent, and then he looked at himself, he thought he looked magnificent.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I just thought that was interesting.
That is very interesting because now he's saying it, Thranduil is saying it in response to
He's
Bilbo's
being given that
generosity.
title now, right? Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very
Not to
cool.
mention the title of Elf Friend, which is like the coolest thing you can get.
That's important.
That's like a really big achievement. That's got to be worth at least like 200 gamer points or whatever achievements are worth.
You'll get a trophy for that, yeah.
I think you do. Yeah, you get a gold trophy for Elf Friend.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, this really is a big deal. I mean, he's now been named a friend by a king of dwarves and a king of elves, and he's just a little hobbit.
Yeah. And an elf friend specifically, to have this name bestowed by the elves, this is a really, really important distinction.
Yeah, it's huge.
Huge. While it goes without saying, we can't say, okay, well, this is the list of criteria you need to meet to be called an elf friend. It's not like, you got to have X number of volunteer credits and you got to have, whatever else. It's not like applying
how many
for
dead
college
orcs?
Or anything.
You can't even be considered for elf friend until you have at least 200 dead orcs to your name.
Right. Right, exactly. And you got to have some, some athletic stuff on there and all that.
Extracurricular activities.
Extracurricular stuff. But we can put together a partial list of people who have been called elf friend, and we can see the kind of company that Bilbo is in now with the bestowing of his name. Yeah. Within this book, we get Elrond called an elf friend in Chapter 3 of The Hobbit. Now, of course, we know there's really a little bit more to that story. He's actually half elf. But if you go back to the Silmarillion, in the First Age, the Edain, now that was for those who haven't read the Silmarillion or didn't hear episode, the good men of the three houses who came into the West, they were called the elf friends. So that's basically all the human heroes of the First Age.
Right, right.
Elrond actually
who get named
several.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, several of them are named at the Council of Elrond in Fellowship. Elrond names the mighty elf friends of old. And he goes on to talk about Hador, Húrin, Túrin, and Beren.
Yeah.
Mighty company, as Theoden might say.
Indeed. And that's the list of names that Bilbo's name is now on. Hador, Húrin, Túrin, and Beren, and Bilbo. One of these things is not like the others. Also in the timeline of The Lord of the Rings, Legolas calls Aragorn an elf friend. And, of course, much later, Gimli is named one, and Frodo himself becomes an elf friend as well.
It's true, yeah.
And then I don't want to forget a key hero of the Legendarium whose name actually was elf friend, Elendil, father of Isildur. And the fact that in early versions of the Legendarium, there was a character named Elfwine, Old English for elf friend, who was a human traveler, found his way to Tolerancia and brought back the stories of the First Age to medieval England.
Yeah, that last comparison to Ælfwine is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because Bilbo's role seems to echo that in some ways.
Well, it does, doesn't it? You're right.
And it shouldn't surprise us because
No.
Ælfwine is probably there's a couple of those characters, Hurin, Turin, and Beren, but that were already in Tolkien's mind when he wrote The Hobbit. But Ælfwine was a big one in Tolkien's mind when he wrote The Hobbit. The way that Bilbo goes on an adventure and then comes back again, and he comes back with all this experience that he brings back to the Shire, and he'll write about that and share that knowledge with others around him. I mean, the fact that he comes back named as an elf friend, and I'll even skip ahead a little bit to the last chapter of The Hobbit where we're told that forever after he remained an elf friend.
Yeah.
That just makes me realize just how profoundly he's been changed by this experience. And I don't know, I haven't figured out everything I want to say about this yet, but I think I want to come back to it in the retrospective and just kind of talk about, kind of looking back on Bilbo's journey and how this changes him.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. We'll definitely be doing that in that retrospective episode.
Yep.
Before we get there, we have to finish this chapter and the next, and that means you take a next reading.
All right. He had many hardships and adventures before he got back. The wild was still the wild, and there were many other things in it in those days beside goblins. But he was well guided and well guarded. The wizard was with him, and Beorn for much of the way, and he was never in great danger again. Anyway, by midwinter, Gandalf and Bilbo had come all the way back, along both edges of the forest, to the doors of Beorn's house, and there for a while they both stayed. Yuletide was warm and merry there, and men came from far and wide to feast at Beorn's bidding. The goblins of the Misty Mountains were now few and terrified, and hidden in the deepest holes they could find, and the wargs had vanished from the woods, so that men went abroad without fear. Beorn indeed became a great chief afterwards in those regions, and ruled a wide land between the mountains and the wood. And it is said that for many generations the men of his line had the power of taking bear's shape, and some were grim men and bad, but most were in heart like Beorn, if less in size and strength. In their day, the last goblins were hunted from the Misty Mountains, and a new peace came over the edge of the wild.
Love that. There's a lot to unpack at the end there about Beorn I definitely want to spend some time on, but going back to the beginning of that passage, this more hardships and adventures, it's sort of like adventure name not appearing in this film. One of those, though, was the Battle of the Anduin Vale, which was the climactic battle in the early versions of the tale before Tolkien decided to settle it with the Battle of the Five Armies. Remember, that was a late addition.
Right.
So, yeah, in that Battle of Anduin Vale, the dwarves didn't even figure it all. They weren't involved. So
right.
I'm glad, again, that it took the form that it did. But I do like
much
the
more
idea
powerful
of,
the way he ended it up.
Oh, much. I just like the idea of adventure name not appearing in this film. But yeah, I mean, being safe. Well, yeah, you're with a wizard and with a bear man. I mean, that's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
But I love they have a little Christmas break there at Beorn's house.
Spending Christmas with the bear.
Yeah, presumably the bees are asleep. It's probably not a lot, hopefully they got a lot of honey stored up.
Yep. I'm still thinking of Christmas with the Bear. I'm sure that I can't help but think that was a little Easter egg you put in there for his kids.
Oh, yeah. North Polar Bear.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's zero doubt in my mind. That's exactly what he's thinking of is Christmas with the bear.
Yeah.
And then the peace, the wargs vanishing, the goblins few and hiding.
Goblins are few. The ones that are there are hiding. Yeah.
They're terrified. I love that.
There's more of that renewal, that restoration. Of the region.
And we get even more of that renewal with Beorn becoming a great chief of the region. And this is the part of this passage I really enjoy kind of pondering about here, thinking about what happens with Beorn, because we're not really told a lot about the Beornings.
Right. Yeah.
We don't know a lot.
No.
But it is interesting that for many generations, the men of his line, not the women, it would seem, just the men, could take bear shape. Huh. Pretty cool.
I wonder about that, if it's the women too. I mean, the way I just now read it, it was implying that it's only the men, not the women.
Yeah, the men of his line, but...
Yeah. And it's hard to tell because, whereas in the Silmarillion, Tolkien capitalizes men when he's talking about humans.
That's true, but he's talking about them
here,
as a race. No.
Yeah. He doesn't do that here, so we are left to speculate whether it is men as in humans or men as in males.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting. You're right. I mean, I think if it were capitalized men, I would be thinking that we're talking about just humans, that we're talking about mankind. But specifically, the men of his line tells me that we're talking, a genetic thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't know. It's an interesting question, though.
Yeah. And of course, we have no answer. It's all speculation.
No, not at all.
I mean, there's so little about the Beornings.
Right. And the fact that it says some were grim men and bad, that almost, well, no, I'm probably reading way too much into that. I was thinking it's, sort of the male heir that this is passed on to, but maybe not. Maybe it's all the men. I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I'm in pure speculation mode here. I'm just guessing.
Isn't that fun, though? That's the fun stuff.
It is, yeah. I like to have a little more to go on than this.
Yeah, I know. It's a little more fun to speculate when you have something to come up with, something to base it on.
Yeah.
So spring arrives, and they leave. It's time to go home.
So 3 months, right? So they spent 3 months with Beorn, if they were there from Yule to the beginning of spring.
And then Yuletide was warm, and so they stayed there until spring, when they take their leave. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the chapter here.
All right.
At last they came up the long road and reached the very pass where the goblins had captured them before. But they came to that high point at morning, and looking backward they saw a white sun shining over the outstretched lands. There behind lay Mirkwood, blue in the distance and darkly green at the nearer edge, even in the spring. There, far away, was the lonely mountain on the edge of eyesight. On its highest peak, snow yet unmelted was gleaming pale. "So comes snow after fire, and even dragons have their ending," said Bilbo, and he turned his back on his adventure. The Tookish part was getting very tired, and the Baggins was daily getting stronger. "I wish now only to be in my own armchair," he said. So
ready to go home.
The Baggins is definitely, they've been reconciled, but the Baggins is definitely, feeling a little stronger right now.
Getting stronger as he gets closer to home. Yeah.
You know what's interesting is how different his thoughts are here. When he was here previously, and we talked about how they came to that exact point where they'd been captured.
Yeah.
Compare that to his earlier thoughts when he got here. And I pulled the lines from way back when, chapter 2 or 3 or 4, I think it was. Yeah, it was 4.
That sounds right, yeah.
Far, far away in the west, where things were blue and faint, Bilbo knew there lay his own country of safe and comfortable things and his little hobbit hole. So he was looking back at his home and thinking about how comfortable it was. And here he is now turning his back on the adventure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
That's true, yeah. And I feel now he's looking forward a little bit more. I mean, he's turning his back on his adventure, but he's looking forward again to home. Finally home is in front of him again.
Yes.
I guess that's obvious because he's turned around and he's coming back home. But I think there's something kind of poignant about the fact that
broaching the mountain peaks. Now he's over the top, and now home really is there. In a visible place. But he's able to see the lonely mountain. And what about that line? "So comes snow after fire, and even dragons have their ending."
That is lovely.
It is lovely. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. I guess
the
point is that dragons are going to, they're going to have their end because fire has its end. Snow,
Fire can be quenched. We talked about
how the elemental nature of that.
Yeah, and we talked about Smaug. Recognized that the lake was was big enough to put him out, to quench him.
Yeah,
and maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's just that that quenching of the fire of dragons. Maybe there's a subtle hint in Tolkien's mind of Ulmo versus Morgoth here. I don't know.
Wow.
I'm probably reading too much into that, but that's kind of neat.
Maybe. The Tookish part is getting tired. It's like the adventure has now taken me a very long time. And even though this, incredibly long time, 3 months probably at Beorn's, I'm sure has been restful, I'm ready to get home. I want to be in my own armchair.
The Tookish part is ready to hang up his mithril coat and his weapons and just be Bilbo again.
Yeah, absolutely. Bilbo Baggins, Underhill. I can't blame him. Well, it may not make us as sad as Bilbo saying goodbye to his dwarf friends, but we are a little saddened by the knowledge that a few of you tune out for a few minutes after our chapter discussions.
Well done.
I'd say shame on you, but I really understand. Do us a favor, though, please. Stick around. We're going to make it worth your while. Not only do we have good stuff in Bartleman's bag, but there really is an important announcement that we want to make. And believe it or not, it is not about Mythmoot.
No, it's not. Well, at least not mostly. We want to make sure you're all aware of what to expect after we wrap up our read-through of The Hobbit next week, so please do stick around. You really do want to hear this.
You will. As Sean said, our next episode will cover the last chapter of The Hobbit. After that, we'll do our retrospective in episode 87, kind of a look back at some of the major themes and our favorite moments from the story.
Not to mention some of your questions about The Hobbit that we haven't gotten a chance to answer yet, and maybe even some Silmarillion questions that we still have at the bottom of the bag if we have time. What can we say? Lots of people still have questions about the Silmarillion.
We'll be answering those in Season 8.
I'm sure.
And then a week after that is when we'll be at Mythmoot 5, which we'll be recording and releasing on the feed as episode 88.
And following that, we'll be releasing our next Questions After Nightfall episode, where we're going to be joined again by several of our listeners for live recorded Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe there will be one little surprise after that. But
maybe.
Then,
yeah,
what do we get on to?
Then, well, as we said in our last episode, we're not going anywhere. We have a plan for the next several years. Yes, it's a several years plan. It begins with The Lord of the Rings, of course, and we are very excited, but that is a huge, huge job, and we really want to do it right. Truth is, our weekly schedule just has not left us a lot of time, really hasn't left us any time for planning out our approach to that incredibly daunting project.
No, and it also hasn't given us the time to work on a few other things that we'd like to do just to have ready for Season 3.
Yeah.
And frankly, it hasn't given us a whole lot of time to rest either.
No.
To quote the great Bilbo Baggins, we're feeling, what was it again, Alan?
Yeah, well, all thin, sort of stretched, if you know what I mean. Like butter that has been scraped over too much bread, and that is such a sad thing. When you finish off the butter cube and you don't
Not
quite have enough
bread. Oh yeah, that's
you're just
sad.
like, I don't want to get out a whole new cube, but I'm going to have to, because you can't have butter.
You
that's
can't
been
have
scraped
the
over
bread
too
without
much.
enough butter. It just doesn't.
No, that's true.
No, it's not. Why bother eating the bread if you're not going to have the right amount of butter on it?
That is correct.
So, yeah, that's kind of how we're feeling. And while we do love doing this, we love every moment of it, I promise.
Very much.
But we want to make sure that we continue to give you the best Tolkien podcast around, or at least the best one we can give you.
There you go. That's a much better bar, more achievable. So, after Mythmoot and after we release the one or maybe two other things we've got in the works, we will be taking a brief hiatus for the summer. Now, it's not going to be all summer. It's not going to be too long. It's just a few weeks. We plan to be back to start Season 3 sometime in mid-August. After all, it's the job that's never started as takes longest to finish, as my old gaffer used to say.
But don't worry. While we're off, we'll still be around on social media. Bartleman will still be bringing us the mail. And most importantly, we will still be working on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Or on things related to the podcast. All
Absolutely.
with an eye towards making things even better in Season 3.
That's right. Now, we are planning on doing the same thing now between each season going forward, so we just wanted to kind of give you that heads up. Not only will that keep us fresh and entertaining, to paraphrase Sean, as entertaining as we can be, it will give us a chance to prepare for each of the upcoming seasons more thoroughly and to kind of get that roadmap going. So There you have it. If you have any questions, just let us know on social media. Feel free to reach out to us or by emailing Bartleman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
And if you registered for Mythmoot, you can tell us in person how much you're going to miss the podcast. See, I told you it wasn't primarily about Mythmoot.
And if you aren't coming, don't worry. We'll be airing that live on Facebook at the time of the event, Saturday, June 23rd at 1 o'clock Eastern. And like we said, we'll be putting it up on the podcast feed as episode 88.
And while we're not going to ask you for anything, if you'd like to see how we're doing towards our Patreon goals, you can see them at patreon.com/prancingponypod. And of course, we want to give a very special shout out to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier: DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Don in Vancouver Island, and Emily in Texas. Thank you all.
Indeed, thank you. Well, Sean, why don't we go ahead and get on with Bartleman's bag? Our first question is from Tarek in Chicago, who asks, I was re-listening to episode 9 today, and a question popped into my head that seemed a bit relevant, given the recent focus on dwarves. Do you think Aulë molded the dwarves, at least the original fathers under the mountain, in his own image, or at least in likeness to the raiment that he had chosen for himself? Had anything ever been written about this by Tolkien?
Well, nothing's ever been written about it, so we're kind of in pure speculation.
Hey, we do that, though.
We do, yeah. We are totally in speculation territory here, Tarek. I guess I'll go first here. If you remember that line from Reverend Lovejoy in The Simpsons, you know, the short answer, yes with an if, long answer, no with a but. This is kind of like that, except it's mostly just no with a but for me.
Yeah.
If you go back to the language from the Silmarillion, chapter 2, it says, "And Aulë made the dwarves even as they still are, because the forms of the children who were to come were unclear to his mind, and because the power of Melkor was yet over the earth, and he wished therefore that they should be strong and unyielding." Now this tells us that Aulë didn't make the dwarves in his own image. What I pick up on there is that he made them in the shape that he thought elves and men were going to take. He was just a little fuzzy on the details, so they came out a little shorter and hairier, and I don't know, maybe if he talked to his wife first, he could have compared notes with her. She at least had seen the vision too, and maybe she could say, no, I got a little bit different,
I think they're a little taller than that.
Yeah, right. But back to the question. This makes sense because, as Tarek kind of hinted in his question, Aulë doesn't have an image. He's a Vala, and he can change his raiment at will.
Right.
But here's where the Lovejoy but comes in, because remember also, there's a statement in Ainulindale that says, "The Valar took to themselves shape and hue, and because they were drawn into the world by love of the children of Ilúvatar, for whom they hoped, they took shape after that manner which they had beheld in the vision of Ilúvatar, save only in majesty and splendor." So my interpretation of that, here's a possibility. I'm not willing to say this is definitely the case, but here's a possibility. If Aulë's imperfect memory of the vision was his basis for the dwarves, and if his memory of the vision was also his basis for his own preferred raiment, as it was for all the Valar, then I would be willing to say it's possible that his usual look might have been fairly similar to the way dwarves came out. It's not his own image, because as a Vala, he can change that at any time.
Right.
And I suspect that even if he did look like a dwarf at first, he would have been bigger because there's the majesty and splendor.
Well,
But then you got to imagine that probably the first time he saw elves, he probably thought, oh, well, I didn't think they'd be that tall. So he probably took on a form that was more elf-like. And he probably, since there were always elves around, he probably would take on a form that was more elf-like, as soon as Ingwe arrived.
Yeah.
I think that would probably become his usual look pretty quickly. So I guess I'm saying no, but I'm willing to believe that it's possible that his raiment for himself was very similar to the way he made dwarves.
I don't know. I'm fairly sure Manwë and the other Valar weren't calling Aulë the stunted Vala. So, no, I happen to fall pretty firmly on the no side of this.
Majesty and splendor, man. Majesty and splendor.
That's right. It's clear. The forms of the children were unknown to Aulë. I mean, apparently all he knew was that they were bipedal. I mean, that's about it. At least he didn't make them walk around.
Right? I assume he got the right number of fingers.
Somewhere on the front of the face or some visual sensory organs, But in the middle of that line Sean gave us, I think, is the key. We get this because the power of Melkor was yet over the earth, and he wished, therefore, they should be strong and unyielding. That's why they're strong. That's why they're stocky. That's why they're tough. That's why they're just, built like a fire hydrant, short and thick. Aulë didn't need to take a particular shape in order to deal with Melkor, but his creations did have to have a particular shape in order to deal with him. So I don't think they bear any resemblance to their maker, except I would at least guess that he has a beard when he's wearing his raiment, maybe. That's kind of the only thing I can think of, because he does seem to be really attached to facial hair. But I will say one more thing. Given his little tiff with the missus, I am not surprised that he made the dwarves a predominantly male race. He seems to have forgotten how important women are, wouldn't you say? There's something there.
As much as I want to argue with your firm no, because I do still think there's a possibility there, I kind of love your last insight so much that I'm just going to let the whole thing stand. So
Good.
I'm willing to agree to disagree on that one minor point, because I think we're on the same page otherwise.
I think we are.
So our next question is from Moritz in Germany, who asked us a question about the invisibility effect of the One Ring. He said, in the chapter Flies and Spiders, when Bilbo just finishes his second song and slashes through the nets to get back to the dwarves, it says that the spiders saw the sword. Does this line appear in the first edition Hobbit? If so, what do you make of it in the context? And if not, do you think that this is Gondolin magic, canceling that of Sauron? An interesting question. And just to confirm, Bilbo does have the ring on at the point that Moritz is talking about. He put it on a couple of pages before, basically right before he found the group of spiders talking about eating the dwarves. And then he doesn't take it off again until he rescues Fili. So, as Moritz says, Bilbo is invisible, but Sting is not. To answer Moritz's first question, yes, the entire sentence that is on page 148 of our edition that begins, "The spiders saw the sword, though I don't suppose they knew what it was," that whole sentence is exactly word for word in the first edition. It's on page 166 if you've got the first edition or the facsimile. So
yeah, if you've got the first edition,
yeah,
that's a whole other ballgame.
So it doesn't have anything to do with Sting's elvish magic canceling Sauron's magic, because the effect was the same long before Sauron had anything to do with the ring. So obviously what we're seeing is that the ring's invisibility has a limited effect. The wearer is invisible, but whatever he's holding in his hand is visible. Now, it has to be only when he's wielding Sting, when he's actually holding it in his hand, because Bilbo was invisible in the Elven King's halls for weeks, and I kind of think the elves would have noticed a sword from Gondolin floating around the halls. So the question is...
There's that floating sword again.
What is up with the floating sword? Galleon, do you know what's going on with this floating sword? But the question is Sting visible when wielded because of its elvish make, or would any item that the wearer is holding be visible? Or maybe would any magical item be visible? I think that's the question.
Well, interestingly, that is interesting, because we got a similar question from a listener in Texas by the name of Chad, although about a different ring bearer and actually a different magic item. He says, the One Ring could not cover the Elendilmir's luminosity, but add a hoodie and it can. What the one could cover always seemed a little unscientific to me. For instance, hold a ball, dawn ring, covered. Drop ball, Well, clever phrasing to the question, I will say. As a reminder, the Elendilmir was the star of Elendil, made of elvish crystal, that Isildur wore on a mithril fillet as the token of his kingship over Arnor. He was wearing it when he was ambushed by orcs at the Gladden Fields, and when he tried to escape with the ring, here's a passage from Unfinished Tales, he set it upon his finger with a cry of pain, and was never seen again by any eye upon Middle-earth. But the Elendilmir of the west could not be quenched, and suddenly it blazed forth red and wrathful as a burning star. Men and orcs gave way in fear, and Isildur, drawing a hood over his head, vanished into the night. Now, in that case, the Elendilmir was on his head and not in his hand, but it was visible because it shone with its own light. Now, until he covered it with his hood. So we have another case of covering the object while invisible makes the object invisible.
Right. And, the description of the Elendilmir blazing red and wrathful as a burning star reminds me of Weathertop. When Frodo put on the ring to try to hide from the ring wraiths, and then he drew the barrow sword, and it said, desperate, he drew his own sword, and it seemed to him that it flickered red, as if it was a firebrand. Interestingly, Frodo's sword, because remember, this is the barrow sword, this is before he has Sting, this is another artifact of the North Kingdom. It's Númenorian, like the Elendilmir. Unfortunately, since we only see that scene from Frodo's point of view, I'm not willing to say for sure whether anyone else saw the sword blazing or if only he did.
No.
But because it stands out so prominently when Frodo sees everything else as dim and dark, that's part of the passage as well, to me that suggests that his sword may be somehow different, and maybe that could mean that it was visible to others. Now, that's totally speculation. I'm not going to hang my hat on it, but it's a possibility.
No, of course. And there's one more thing to consider. We saw in the chapter a couple weeks back that Bilbo wrapped the Arkenstone in a rag before putting the ring on and crossing the lines over to Bard's camp. Now, obviously he did that so Bombur wouldn't see it, but we see that once he slipped the ring on, the light of the Arkenstone didn't give him away. And like the Elendilmir, it has to be because it's covered.
Right.
So where do we land on this?
Wow. Well, I guess I have to conclude, based on the instances we've looked at today, I think the ring confers invisibility to its wearer and anything on the wearer's person. That means anything under their clothes, in their pockets, sheaths, bags, and otherwise. If it's in their hand, it's probably not invisible, which to me makes all those instances of Bilbo carrying food while he was invisible just a lot funnier to me now.
Why is that pie floating down the...
Galleon, why is the pie floating? Where's the wine going?
Oh, goodness.
And so
funny.
I would add to that anything that shines with its own light would not be invisible, even if it's worn, unless the light source is covered. That accounts for the Elendilmere.
The Elendilmere and the
Arkenstone.
Yeah.
Now, that's just based on what we've dug up for today. I am going to reserve the right to change my mind once we get into Lord of the Rings, if we see some new cases that change that. But, yeah, that's kind of where I am. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I land where you landed. Actually, I remember another moment, and it was before Bilbo knew the ring made him invisible. In Chapter 5, as he begins running from Gollum, he struck his toes on a snag in the floor and fell flat with his little sword under him. Well, it's a good thing the blade wasn't pointed up at the time, I guess, but Tolkien put that in there. Oops, story's over.
And thus little Bilbo died in obscurity under the mountains.
And thus he bled out and was eaten by Gollum. Anyway, I think Tolkien put that in there, that description of the fact that he had to fall with his sword under him, because we knew already as the reader that the sword glowed with blue light and that it would need to be hidden in order for it to be invisible, even though Bilbo was wearing the ring.
That's interesting. I mean, in that case, I wonder if he actually dropped the sword while he was falling, in which case it could have suddenly appeared out of nowhere.
It appears and then disappears.
If he hadn't landed on top of it. Now, Tolkien doesn't say whether he dropped it or not, or whether he had to pick it up again when he picked himself up. But I don't know. Having the sword underneath him certainly kind of dealt with all that, made it unseen without having to mess around with those kind of details, which we know Tolkien.
Which is why I think Tolkien
was not always crazy about dealing with those details.
No. If I don't have to deal with the details, I'm going to find a way to not have to deal with the details.
Would.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tarek, Moritz, and Chad. Folks, that nearly wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. As always, thank you very much for spending your time with us, and we look forward to having you join us again next time when we get to the final chapter, Chapter 19 of The Hobbit.
Roads go ever on and on, but Bilbo's road home and our road through his memoir is coming to an end. But don't be too sad. We still have some good stuff waiting for you in the next episode and in our retrospective.
Oh, we definitely do. And in the meantime, we invite you to please check out the official library tab on our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got links to everything from inexpensive paperbacks to some pretty good stuff for your Tolkien collection.
And if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes for us and leaving a review, we'd be grateful for that. Those reviews help us get more visibility in iTunes, and that just brings more people to our podcast and increases our community.
Absolutely. And thank you to those of you who have. As we say every week, we do continue to read every last one of them. And we're also featuring one a week on our social media networks on Thankful Thursdays. Now, make sure you never miss an episode of the show by subscribing through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And we want to thank everyone who's become part of our social media family. We set out to start a Tolkien conversation that everyone could join, and that's why we have our online common room on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and photos of your Bjorning sightings in the woods. Just don't go messing with Sasquatch. To Barliman at the Prancing...
Well done. Never expected a beef jerky commercial reference.
Beef jerky ad right there. Send those photos, please, to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And, well, we'll try to get them up on our social media because we can't get pictures up in our next episode. But
that too.
However much time we've had, it is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.